In a nation that often silences its boldest truth-tellers, one man stood his ground, with clippers in one hand and conviction in the other.
Which is the bigger threat to American democracy and the Constitution? A Vietnamese mother suckling her child, or a white racist governor in Alabama who says, in so many words, to hell with the Constitution and Johnson and everything else? Which is the greater threat to democracy?
This is true, but these people have a kind of self-deception. You know, they believe, they circulate these myths so long that they've begun to believe them. And once you believe them, as they say, if you define a situation as being real, it will be real in its consequences. And this is just what's happened. They've come to actually believe this. And any evidence to the contrary, he's the exception. But the fact is, all the people who do struggle hard enough to accumulate a down payment, they do want something better for themselves and for their kids, and they hope that their neighbors will be the same kind of people that they are.
A black man fights for the white man, not for himself. He tells you to bleed and you bleed. He said, go bleed in Korea for the white man, and you go bleed because you have to. He tells you to go to Vietnam or Lebanon or Laos, and we have to bleed. Then in Mississippi or Alabama or Omaha, Nebraska, where they're taking our rights and we know who the people are who are taking them, we don't have any blood then. We're radical. Just because we want to get the rights that we fight overseas for so the white man can have. We fight over there to defend his women and children and defend his land from attack. And while we're over there fighting for him, our own people are being attacked by the same white people over here we're supposed to be fighting to defend.
He didn't come from wealth, didn't wear suits, and didn't speak to please. Yet from the worn floors of a North Omaha barbershop, he rose to the halls of state power, armed not with privilege, but with purpose. For over 4 decades, he would become a force the system could not control, a conscience it could not silence.
Few particulars that make Omaha different from New York are just incidental. The problem exists because white people think they're better than black people, and they want to oppress us, and they want us to allow ourselves to be oppressed.
This is the I agree with you perfectly. This is the basic problem.
Then what do you
that white people think they're better than others?
I can't solve the problem. You guys pull the strings that close schools. You guys draw the boundaries that keep our kids restricted to the ghetto. You guys write up the restrictive covenants that keep us out of houses. So it's up to you to talk to your brothers and your sisters and persuade them that they have a responsibility. We've assumed ours for over 400 years, and we're tired of this kind of stuff now. We're not going to suffer patiently anymore. No more turning the other cheek, no more blessing our enemies, no more praying for those who despitefully use us. We're going to show you that we've learned the lessons you've taught us, we've studied your history, and you did not take over this country by singing, "We shall overcome." You did not gain control of the world like you have it now by dealing fairly with a man and keeping your word. You're treaty breakers, you're liars, you're thieves, you rape entire continents and races of people. Then you wonder why these very people don't have any confidence or trust in you.
He was a man of unwavering integrity, known for his unshakable commitment to fairness and truth. Unafraid to speak his mind, he called a spade, regardless of the person before him. His unwavering stance on what was right earned him respect, and he remained a steadfast champion of justice and integrity.
It in Alabama, and I can say you because you're part of the whole system. You profit from it. In fact, you make your living from it. You couldn't walk around and talk to people, stand up in your pulpit on Sunday and preach nice little songs and say, now we're going to give thanks to the Lord for he is good and old Jesus be among us. As far as we're concerned, your Jesus is contaminated, just like everything else you tried to force upon us is contaminated.
Right there in that barbershop, he consistently embodied unwavering integrity through his fearless and uncompromising approach. Committed to truth, he spoke candidly and boldly, calling things as he saw them regardless of status or circumstance. His steadfast dedication to justice and righteousness earned him deep respect, and his courage to stand for what was right, even in the face of adversity, was a powerful reflection of his unshakable character.
And here's what I'll say, I wish you would follow Jesus like we followed him. Because if you did that, then we'd be in charge tomorrow. I think the problem is so bad that we can have no understanding at all.
You think it's gotten to the point where there can never be that reconciliation?
No. You talk about justice, and it means one thing to you, and we talk about it and it means something else to us. And it'll always be that way. And I'd like you to know I have a terrible feeling against preachers because I think you guys are the ones who are largely responsible for the problem in the first place. And you can accept it or not any way you choose. And for you, this may be an excursion, you know, across the line.
What about the person that wants to listen? I genuinely feel that I want to listen.
Well, if you listen and try to do something, you get kicked out of your church. See, that's the way your people are.
Well, we can make changes.
His name was Ernie Chambers, and his barbershop would become much more than a place for haircuts. It was a stage, a sanctuary, and a tribunal, a space where truth was spoken boldly, where silence had no place. In this video, we'll explore the compelling life and legacy of this remarkable man, known as the Radical Barber. From his formative years to his powerful role in the summer of 1966, we'll trace the rise of a voice that challenged injustice, reshaped the political landscape, and why his influence still matters today. Before we dive in, take a moment to support this work. Hit the thumbs up button, share this video with friends and family to help spread this eye-opening Black narrative, and subscribe to stay connected if you haven't already. Let us now dive in.
I went to an almost all-white school in those days, believe it or not. There was a handful of black children in that school. It was Lothrop Elementary School. My parents would never have taught me or allowed me to use derogatory names to call other children. And when I went to school, I was naturally expecting to be taught things that I didn't know. But one day the teacher had this storybook, and it was called Little Black Sambo. And the term I hadn't heard, but it didn't sound good to me. When she would read, the child's name was Sambo. The mother's name was Mumbo. The father's name was Jumbo. And these were the kind of things that seemed like they were designed to make fun of the way black people are expected to talk. She'd read a bit, then when she held up the book so we could see the picture, there was a caricature of a black child. The face was like, as I remember it, a blob with 1,000 little sprigs of hair going every which way, ribbons on it, big red gash for a mouth, eyes like saucers with dots on them, and garish, outlandish clothing that I thought maybe a clown would wear in the circus. And the little white kids, as children will do when they see something funny, laughed. And when they laughed, they looked at me. Being the only black face in the room, to them, I became Little Black Sambo. And I sat in this wooden desk, and I got a position that I could hold. And maybe what kicked in for me was the survival instinct that little animals have. When you're in danger and you can't protect yourself and you don't know anything else, just be still. And it was the most horrible experience that I can remember. And I don't remember any other thing at that period in my life like I remember that story. I'm 83 years old, and I remember it like it was yesterday.
The story of Ernie Chambers is a powerful testament to how one man, grounded in a modest profession, rose to become a fierce and uncompromising voice in the fight for racial justice, community empowerment, and political transformation. He was not born into privilege or positioned near the levers of power. He only carved his path with defiance in his stride and a sharp intellect as his tool. Born in 1937 and stretching his influence well into the 21st century, Chambers' life serves as a mirror to America's most persistent contradictions. A nation that claims liberty, yet polices black existence, that promises equality while codifying injustice, that venerates a constitution adorned with ideals still struggling to be fully realized. His journey isn't just a personal saga, it's a lens through which we can confront the unfinished work of American democracy.
A lot of what I do in this legislature is symbolic. It's to show us that one black man can stand against and among all these white people. Don't walk like them, talk like them, dress like them, do anything they do, and yet compel them to knuckle under on issues.
Ernest William Chambers was born on July 10, 1937, in Omaha, Nebraska, a city already fractured by invisible boundaries. He grew up in a neighborhood carved out by redlining, neglected by city leadership, and routinely targeted by law enforcement. His father, a Baptist minister, brought the weight of the pulpit into their home, while his mother, quiet but resolute, served as the family's moral compass, grounding their faith with the sobering realities of Black life in mid-20th century America. But young Ernie was not one to accept injustice in silence. In a world that tried to dictate his place, he discovered early on that silence was a cage and language, a form of liberation. He absorbed the powerful cadence of sermons from the church and the sharp lessons of survival from the streets. Together, they shaped his righteous, rebellious, and unrelenting voice. He attended Omaha Technical High School, graduating in 1955 amid an atmosphere where many white teachers underestimated Black students. Still, Chambers excelled. He earned a scholarship to Creighton University, a Jesuit institution that, at the time, tolerated rather than welcomed its few Black students. There, he pursued a degree in history and graduated in 1959, joining the small but determined number of Black scholars in predominantly white academia. Yet, even within the walls of higher learning, Chambers found contradictions. He saw religious institutions preach compassion while turning a blind eye to racial injustice. The dissonance between faith and practice didn't make him an atheist immediately, but it lit the first sparks of his lifelong skepticism toward organized religion. For Chambers, morality had to be more than a sermon. It had to confront injustice head-on. Creighton's theology, he would later say, taught him as much about hypocrisy as holiness. He watched white priests preach humility while refusing to dine with Black students. He saw religion, in its institutional form, as an accomplice of segregation. That disillusionment would later sharpen his secular humanism and his lifelong critique of organized faith's complicity in racial oppression. It was at Creighton University that Ernie Chambers began to grasp a hard, unspoken truth. In America, honesty often arrives dressed as confrontation. Speaking plainly, especially while Black, was rarely welcome, and even more rarely without consequence. After earning his degree, Chambers took a job at the Omaha Post Office. There, he encountered a workplace steeped in racial hierarchy, where Black employees were routinely belittled and disrespected by white supervisors. Chambers, never one to accept injustice quietly, spoke up with clarity, with courage, and without apology. The response was swift. He was fired. The message was clear. In a system built on quiet compliance, dignity had a price. And for Chambers, that price became his first profound lesson. That the cost of standing tall could be steep, but it was always worth paying. Jobless but not broken, Chambers sought a space he could claim as his own. He found it in a chair at Goodwin's Spencer Street Barbershop, a weathered little spot in North Omaha. It wasn't grand, but it was his. There, amidst the buzz of clippers and the scent of aftershave, he built something extraordinary. The barbershop became more than a business. It transformed into a grassroots think tank, a sanctuary of free speech and fierce ideas. Men came for haircuts but stayed for dialogue. The price of a trim was modest, but the conversations were unfiltered, passionate, political, immensely invaluable. In that barbershop, Chambers found his pulpit. He wasn't just trimming hair now, he was holding court. Every haircut was a political seminar, every customer a witness to his awakening. His razor cut hair, but his tongue cut hypocrisy. In a country still choking under the shadow of Jim Crow, this shop had become a sanctuary of self-respect and radical thought. It was here, in the heart of the barbershop, that Ernie Chambers began to sharpen not just clippers, but a philosophy. Radical, clear-eyed and unafraid. He spoke boldly of police brutality, of predatory housing practices, of the false promise of integration that still left Black Americans confined to the edges of society. His words didn't come from theory alone. They came from the lived pain and resilience of the people who sat in his chair. This modest shop became a sacred space. Community members, young activists, weary elders, and curious onlookers found their way in. The shop evolved into a kind of grassroots parliament, a gathering place where politics met the personal, where grievances turned into strategy, and where listening was just as vital as speaking. As one observer noted, it gave Ernie a platform to grow. To understand Chambers is to understand that his role as a barber was never secondary. It was foundational. That chair on Spencer Street was his first podium. It was there that he honed the rhetorical force that would one day shake legislative halls. It was there he earned the trust of his neighbors, one haircut and conversation at a time. Chambers recognized that real change is seated not in press conferences, but in everyday interactions rooted in listening, in asking hard questions, and in never mistaking quiet for peace. He read voraciously, Sartre, Baldwin, Du Bois, feeding his intellect while staying grounded in the rhythms of the street. Day after day, men walked in bent by labor, injustice, and fatigue, and left lighter, not only in hair, but in spirit. At this point, white Omaha had learned to fear Ernie Chambers. Black Omaha, on the other hand, had long since learned to revere him. Going forward, by the 1960s, North Omaha and many urban Black communities across America were under pressure. Housing, discrimination, police harassment, job inequality, and a rising sense of impatience with mere accommodation. Into this context stepped Chambers. By 1966, America was deep in the grip of a national reckoning. The country's promises of freedom and equality had frayed, and in cities across the nation, the pressure of long-suppressed injustice finally erupted. That summer, the air was thick with fury and smoke. From Watts to Chicago to Detroit, Black communities rose in rebellion against generations of brutality, poverty, and systemic neglect. Omaha was no exception. It too ignited. In July and early August of that year, tensions in North Omaha reached a breaking point. What began as confrontations between Black youth and police quickly escalated into full-blown unrest. Protests turned to riot, and riot to rebellion, as the streets filled with anger. The Nebraska National Guard was called in to enforce control, a clear sign that the city had lost its grip. But these weren't random outbursts. Police violence, segregated housing, chronic unemployment, and decades of civic neglect had pushed North Omaha to its limit. The rage wasn't sudden. It had been simmering beneath the surface, waiting to be heard. And amid that chaos, one voice rose with clarity and conviction. Ernie Chambers, calm, unflinching, and unwilling to let the system define the narrative. In a city on fire, he emerged not just as a critic, but as a symbol, the man who dared to speak what others feared to say. The barber with the fierce eyes and uncompromising tongue had emerged timely as the community's de facto spokesman. He met with Omaha's mayor, A.V. Sorensen, demanding answers and dignity. He gathered grievances, organized meetings, and refused the patronizing tones of city officials who spoke of law and order while ignoring justice. That same year, Chambers appeared in the documentary A Time for Burning. Intended as a soft exploration of race relations, the film accidentally became one of the most piercing indictments of white liberalism ever recorded and was later nominated for an Oscar award. In it, a well-meaning Lutheran pastor tries to arrange interracial dialogues between his white congregation and North Omaha's Black residents. When he walks into Chambers' barbershop, the young barber listens, then delivers one of the most unforgettable lines in civil rights history. "As far as we're concerned, your Jesus is contaminated."
You couldn't walk around and talk to people, stand up in your pulpit on Sunday and preach nice little songs and say, now we're going to give thanks to the Lord for he is good and old Jesus be among us. As far as we're concerned, your Jesus is contaminated, just like everything else you tried to force upon us is contaminated. Mm-hmm. Well, so you can have him. And here's what I'll say. I wish you would follow Jesus like we followed him. Because if you did that, then we'd be in charge tomorrow. I think the problem is so bad that we can have no understanding at all.
The air seemed to stop. The pastor blinked, stunned into silence. Ernie Chambers had just delivered a searing indictment, not of faith itself, but of the hypocrisy embedded in white Christianity's legacy. He spoke of a religion that had blessed slavery, looked away during segregation, and remained silent in the face of black suffering. His words weren't crafted to offend, but to awaken. Still, white America didn't see a truth teller. Instead, they saw a threat. The backlash was swift. The New York Times reviewed the documentary that captured his statement. Clergy across the Midwest issued public condemnations. But in North Omaha, Ernie wasn't scorned. He was immortalized. The barber who cut through illusions with words sharper than any blade. The man who told the truth so unflinchingly that even faith took a step back. In 1968, Chambers ran for public office for the first time, aiming for a seat on the Omaha Public Schools Board. Unfortunately, he lost. A year later, he tried again, this time for a seat on the Omaha City Council. Once again, it was another defeat. But these weren't failures, they were groundwork. During this time, Chambers worked as a school counselor at Tech High School, where he also taught Black history. His classes were unapologetic, rooted in truth and pride, and predictably too radical for the institution. In 1970, he was dismissed, but the system's rejection only sharpened his resolve. The stage was being set, and Ernie Chambers was just getting started. By 1971, Chambers transformed his community voice into electoral power. He ran for the Nebraska legislature. No major party backed him, no lobby financed him. His campaign slogan was simple: the system must answer to the streets. Against long odds, he won, becoming the only Black member of Nebraska's unicameral legislature, representing Omaha's predominantly Black District 11, and one of the few in the nation to rise directly from working-class activism.
There are some communities in Nebraska which are out of touch with the trends of this modern society, this modern world, and these particular communities have to be dragged, even if it's kicking and screaming, into the 20th century.
In a legislature that was overwhelmingly white, conservative, and male, the barber from North Omaha cut an unforgettable figure. He entered the state capitol in Lincoln wearing blue jeans, t-shirts, and sandals. His hair was natural, his posture unbending. To white legislators, he was a provocation. To his constituents, a revelation.
And when I came down there, they were so terrified of me that they drilled holes in that beautiful wood on the ceiling of the chamber and installed these television cameras so they could keep an eye on me, and brought state troopers into the chamber because they thought I came down here to do physical battle.
Upon entering the legislature, Chambers refused to conform. He immediately challenged the rituals of power, declining to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. To him, a nation built on slavery had not earned his allegiance, and a flag that had never protected Black lives was not worthy of his devotion. His presence was not performative, it was principled. Every act, every word was a reminder that justice requires more than symbolism. It demands truth.
When this flag represents liberty and justice for all,
he said,
then I will stand.
He also refused to wear a suit, declaring that dignity was not measured by fabric or conformity. In a chamber of polished shoes and tailored silence, Chambers stood out, not for lack of respect, but for his unwavering commitment to substance over style. He demanded plain language in legislation, challenged closed-door dealings, and wielded his sharp wit like a scalpel, cutting through hypocrisy with precision. No injustice went unchecked in his presence. He made the halls of power echo with uncomfortable truths.
So I had to mess with other people's bills. I had to offer amendments. I had to fight against bills that I did not like, and I had to force them to respect me for what I knew.
Over the decades, Ernie Chambers emerged as Nebraska's most formidable and uncompromising moral voice. In a chamber built on decorum and diplomacy, he transformed the legislative floor into a courtroom of accountability, commanding attention with relentless filibusters, piercing logic, and unapologetic truth-telling. His words were weapons, his intellect razor-sharp, and his commitment to justice unshakable. Feared by opponents and respected even by critics, Chambers became the conscience of a state, refusing to be silenced, softened, or sidelined.
On this proposed rule change and on other things this session, we're going to fight like scorpions in a bottle. I promise you that. I own you. You are my legislature. I feel like a duke or an earl or whoever is in charge of a fiefdom. What will you do if the bill goes back to the committee? You'll wind up making all this noise like the mountain, and then it will bring forth a mouse. You cannot even pass a budget. You put the rules in place that I voted against, and now you won't follow your rules. And I told you that the day you adopted them. Your rules would bite you before they bite me. And the most important thing that you do as a legislature is to build a budget, and you won't even pass it on the day that the rules you all adopted say you should pass it.
He relentlessly filibustered racist legislation, not to stall, but to educate, to expose, and to demand accountability. Chambers forced the legislature to confront uncomfortable truths about poverty, injustice, and systemic inequality. He introduced and championed bills to abolish corporal punishment in schools, fought for district-based elections that empowered Black communities to choose their own representatives, and advanced pension reforms that guaranteed gender equity. But above all, he waged a decades-long battle against the death penalty, viewing it not as justice, but as a modern extension of America's long, bloody ritual of racial terror. In 1979, he returned to Creighton to finish his law degree, graduating as a Juris Doctor, an act not of ambition, but of armament.
They make laws to keep us out,
He said.
so I'll learn their laws to fight back.
By decade's end, he had achieved what no one thought was possible. A working-class Black barber had become the moral compass of a state legislature in one of the whitest regions of America. The 1980s brought new challenges. While Reagan's America celebrated wealth, pushed law and order rhetoric, slashed social programs, and criminalized Black poverty, Ernie Chambers stood as an unflinching counterforce. He remained a voice of radical integrity in a political landscape increasingly hostile to the marginalized. Though Nebraska's divestment didn't cause an immediate corporate exodus from South Africa, it sparked a movement. Other states, cities, and eventually the federal government followed suit, pressuring South Africa economically and morally. Chambers went further in 1984, spearheading a tougher law mandating divestment, which led Nebraska to pull $14.6 million from companies doing business in South Africa. When Archbishop Desmond Tutu visited Lincoln to acknowledge Nebraska's role in ending apartheid, the state government hosted him, but pointedly excluded the man responsible for that legacy. Ernie Chambers wasn't there to receive praise, but the truth was undeniable. Nebraska had helped dismantle apartheid, and it was Chambers who lit the match. In 1980, Chambers introduced a groundbreaking resolution that made Nebraska the first state in the U.S. to call for divestment from companies profiting off apartheid in South Africa. While the federal government and corporate elites continued to cozy up to the racist regime in Pretoria, a lone Black senator from Omaha forced his white colleagues to confront the global parallels of racial oppression. His efforts weren't symbolic. Upon learning that the University of Nebraska held several hundred South African gold Krugerrands, Chambers introduced a resolution urging the reinvestment of state pension funds away from apartheid-linked businesses. The resolution was clear: Apartheid was incompatible with Nebraska's professed values of human rights and equality. In 1980, Ernie Chambers became the lead figure in a pivotal case, Marsh versus Chambers, which challenged the Nebraska legislature's long-standing practice of opening its sessions with a prayer delivered by a state-funded chaplain. Chambers argued that this practice violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which prohibits government endorsement of religion. A federal district court partially agreed, ruling that while legislative prayer itself did not breach the Constitution, the use of taxpayer money to fund the chaplain did. The case then moved to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals, which went further, declaring that both the prayer and the public funding were unconstitutional. However, in 1983, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a narrow 6-3 decision, overturned the lower rulings. The court held that both the prayer and its state funding were constitutional, citing the nation's unique history of legislative invocations dating back to the Founding Fathers. Although Chambers lost the case, Marsh versus Chambers became a landmark in the ongoing national debate over the separation of church and state. This was another example of his willingness to challenge deeply rooted traditions in pursuit of constitutional clarity and justice. Although the Supreme Court ruled against him, the case had cemented Chambers' reputation as a defender of the wall between church and state, and as a man who refused to allow public piety to obscure moral failure. Chambers' opponents tried to isolate him. He was often the single dissenting vote, but isolation only sharpened his resolve. He once told a reporter, "They can outvote me, but they can't outthink me." By the 1990s, Ernie Chambers' influence had become the stuff of legend. Long before it was politically convenient, he stood boldly for LGBTQ rights, co-sponsoring a 1993 bill that sought to ban employment discrimination based on sexual orientation, a stance that placed him ahead of his time and alone in many legislative battles. He remained a fierce defender of welfare programs and a relentless opponent of the death penalty, introducing bill after bill to abolish capital punishment, often as the sole voice of resistance. But as his record of moral victories and outspoken leadership grew, so did the opposition. By the year 2000, political frustration with Chambers' enduring presence reached a boiling point. Nebraska voters passed term limits that capped service to 2 consecutive terms in the unicameral legislature. Though the law applied broadly, many acknowledged what was unspoken. The measure was crafted with one man in mind, Ernie Chambers. Chambers smiled.
"They can't silence the people of North Omaha,"
he said.
"They can only delay them."
When term limits forced Ernie Chambers out of office in 2008, after nearly 40 years of service, he didn't disappear, he evolved. He returned to the community that had shaped him, continuing to cut hair, mentor young activists, and speak truth without the filter of politics. But his story wasn't finished. In 2012, the people of Omaha brought him back to the legislature. He reclaimed his seat, older, wiser, but no less resolute. Then, in 2015, Chambers achieved the legislative victory that had defined his mission for decades. Nebraska voted to abolish the death penalty, becoming the first conservative state in modern history to do so. For Chambers, it was more than a policy win. It was a moral reckoning. He had long called capital punishment the legal residue of lynching, and now his words had finally changed the law. The triumph, however, was short-lived. In 2016, the governor pushed a referendum to reinstate the death penalty. It passed. Yet even in that setback, Chambers' moral clarity stood untouched. He had compelled one of the nation's most conservative states to pause, to wrestle with justice, and, if only for a moment, to choose compassion over cruelty. He never courted comfort. He filed bold lawsuits, including the famous 2007 suit against God, where he protested the hypocrisy of those who invoked divine will in politics while denying people justice.
You can't sue God.
The court said.
You can't locate him.
Chambers replied,
If you can't locate him, then stop pretending he's running this state.
The judge dismissed it, but Chambers had made his point. Religion could not be both shield and sword in a secular state. When his final term ended in January 2021, Ernie Chambers had served 46 years in the Nebraska legislature, the longest in its history. He left with no riches, no monuments, and no apologies. Going forward, to call Ernie Chambers radical is to risk misunderstanding him. He was not radical in the sense of chaos or destruction, but in the truest, oldest sense of the word, radix, meaning root. Chambers was a man who dug deep, unafraid to expose the root of injustice. And once he found it, he didn't politely prune around it. He confronted it directly and relentlessly. His radicalism was not born of anger or hatred, but of moral clarity. In a society built on white fragility and the evasions of institutional power, clarity itself became a revolutionary act. Chambers didn't see America's racial crisis as a mere policy issue to him. It was a moral indictment. His voice cut through the noise with precision, calling not just for reform, but for reflection, accountability, and truth.
I don't hate white people.
He said,
I hate white supremacy, and they are not the same thing.
Chambers' life challenges us to rethink what democracy truly means. When one man of unwavering conscience can achieve more justice than entire political parties combined. He showed us that politics without integrity is mere theater, and that dignity can endure even in defeat. Perhaps the most remarkable truth about Ernie Chambers is that he never really left the barbershop. Even as a legislator, he stayed accessible and grounded. Constituents could walk into his small, cluttered office in jeans and speak freely. He always called them my bosses. He continued cutting hair until age and law made it impossible, saying that the simple act kept him connected to his community and to reality. His barbershop was a microcosm of America itself, a space of struggle, truth, and community. It was here that he learned the fundamental lesson of leadership, which begins with listening. Ernest Ernie Chambers was, in many ways, the man America couldn't absorb. He belongs to a proud lineage of uncompromising Black thinkers, Frederick Douglass, Malcolm X, James Baldwin, each of whom forced the nation to confront its deepest lies. Yet Chambers is unique in that he fought from within the system without being consumed by it. He entered politics not out of ambition, but as an act of resistance, refusing to wear the mask of civility demanded by white power. His legacy is a powerful reminder that true change often comes from those who refuse to conform, those who speak truth to power, no matter the cost. Ernie Chambers once said,
Justice is not a favor, it is a right, and a right is something you must demand, not request.
Ernie Chambers showed us that true power doesn't always come from grand titles or polished speeches. It comes from courage, conviction, and staying rooted in your community. From a barbershop chair in Omaha, he challenged injustice, broke barriers, and gave a voice to the voiceless for over 4 decades. His story reminds us that real change starts with listening, speaking truth, and refusing to back down. As we reflect on the legacy of the Radical Barber, let his unwavering spirit inspire us to stand up for what's right, no matter the odds. Thanks for watching. If you found this story inspiring, kindly support our works by hitting the thumb button before you, share, and subscribe for more untold histories and powerful voices. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep pushing for justice. See you in our next video.